All right, so back to the story. Like I said, when I was younger, I hated religion and spirituality because I saw it as white supremacist. So, for instance, like the Bible, they would say, "Oh, the Jews were conquered because they were sinning, and you get sick because you were sinning." You know, and I always saw that as scapegoating, or I saw it as blaming the victim. And in my mind, I wanted to be like, no, the people who wrote that were just superstitious, conservative men who wanted to maintain order, and the way they maintained order was through believing in a God. And they say that sin causes bad things because there's a conservative nature within all tribes, and that maintains the structure of the tribe, and that helps the genes of the tribe. So I just want to see it all as Darwinism, and there's that conservative bent is good for the genes of the tribe. So when bad things happen to people, they would blame it on them sinning, and because God was punishing them. And now my grandpa, he'd be like, "Well, I don't believe in a separate God. I believe God is energy." And I like that because I'm like, okay, good. Yeah, that seems like anti-Christian. And I always hated Christianity. I always hated religion because I saw it as white supremacist. I was a Marxist. I want to destroy religion. And really, and the people I hated the most was the white people, because I saw Christianity as related to the white people, and I wanted to destroy the white race. And that's why I was so into welfare and opening borders and all that. And and I saw the Christians who didn't want the Muslims to come in, just white supremacists. I thought it was just a smokescreen for white supremacy, to say I'm Christian and that's why I don't want the Muslims. I was like, no, they're just white people, and that's why they say that they're Christian, so that they can keep the Muslims out who are darker colored, right? So I just thought it was white supremacy, and I thought it was just Darwinism at its core. And the reason why people adopted different beliefs was because of Darwinian motivations to maintain their genes, and in this case, white supremacy's genes, the genes of the white people, through religion. So like I remember, like I said, I went to a black church with all women, and the women were like, they kind of believed like that the reason why the Europeans enslaved them was because they were worshiping idols in Africa, and the Europeans actually helped them by giving them Christianity. And I was like, dude, that's just victim blaming. That's blaming yourselves. And I like my grandpa's ideas better, because my grandpa's like, everything is energy, and even people who worship the idols, they can be saved or they can get in the flow. But even my grandpa, though, like, I like my grandpa's ideas, but at the same time, I still thought it was white supremacy. I still saw it as spirituality, and I didn't like anything spiritual, because I thought all spirituality was white supremacy. So, for instance, my grandpa would say, well, it's not God punishing for sins. That's magical thinking. That's, but my grandpa would be like, what it is, and this isn't really what Dr. Hora taught, who was a founder of metapsychiatry. I think Dr. Hora saw things as more magical, and I think Dr. Hora would have been more open to the quadrant model. My grandpa wasn't open to the quadrant model because he thought it was too magical, and he'd be like, you believe this seems like magical thinking, to think that things are organized around the cross, around the quadrant. I see everything as energy, and yes, there's a complexification of the energy events to the kingdom of heaven, but everything's energy, and to believe in a separate God, or magical, that seems magical. Now, I didn't necessarily say separate God, but it's implied with the quadrant model that everything is organized around one pattern, that there's something supernatural going on, but my grandpa wasn't open to that. But anyways, my grandpa would be like, well, the people don't get sick because of they're being punished by a separate God. That's magical thinking. But then my grandpa would be like, but my grandpa, at the same time, he'd say that it's because they aren't in the flow, because they aren't in oneness consciousness, they aren't in the flow. And even Dr. Hora, he would say like, yeah, he wouldn't necessarily say that there's a separate God causing the storm that caused the destruction, but he would say, if you have invalid thoughts, then you create the storm. And so in a sense, it is still like you're being punished for your sins. But in a way that he would say, though, but they don't believe in a separate God. Dr. Hora would say God is infinite love, intelligence, and you are one with God, and there is no self, and everything is one and everything, right? But it still, to me, seemed like victim blaming. And I always saw victim blaming as white supremacy. And that, like the black women who were like, yeah, we were conquered because, and actually Christianity was good, and being enslaved was good because it helped give us Christianity because we were worshiping idols. And so I always hated religion, and I was a Marxist because I wanted to destroy the white race, and I saw the Christianity and religion in general as maintaining the white race. So like I said, I even think that I wanted to be like an antichrist because, like I said, I had a vision. Like I watched this guy, his name was like Walid Shobat or something, and he said that he thought that the 666 would be in the name of Allah, chiasm. And the chiasm because he says that in the Greek language that or whatever, Aramaic or whatever, I don't remember, that equals 666. And he said that the chiasm is the crossed swords of Islam. And so he was saying that he thought that the beast and the Antichrist would be Islam. And in a way, I was like, well, that would be kind of cool, because I thought it would be awesome to have Islam overtake Christianity and all the white people be killed by the Muslims. Because I saw myself as Jewish, and I saw white people and Christians as the biggest threat to Jews, and especially just white people, So I, like, and my idea was like, okay, well, what would be a good idea is, if I ever got power, I would create a four-caste society, and I would dissolve all the borders of all the countries, and I would mix everybody into four castes. So you wouldn't divide people by race, but you would divide people by castes, like, the NT Rationals and the SJ Guardians and the SP Artisans and the NF Idealists, the first quadrant, second quadrant, third quadrant, fourth quadrant, and that would be the chiasm. And I would be like, okay, in the name of, put everybody on everybody's foreheads, in the name of Allah, and then you put the four castes and you mark whatever caste you're in, and that's what society would be based on. But in my vision, I would dissolve all the borders and create kind of like a Marxist land where you dissolve all the borders and you get all the races to mix. And my motivation for that was I wanted to mix the white race, because I saw the white race as the biggest threat to the Jews. And I was like, if we could just mix all the races, then religion would disappear. Because I thought that religion was just an epiphenomena of Darwinism, and that's the reason why white people choose Christianity and, black people choose Islam, and, Persians choose Shiite and Arabs choose Sunni, and it's because they're trying to maintain their division and maintain their distinction for their genes. So I didn't like religion because I thought religion divided people, and I wanted everybody to mix because I wanted the white people to mix so that I could defeat them, because I was a leftist and I was anti-white. So regardless, okay, that's my point. I was a Marxist. I was always for welfare, but then my grandpa, I always thought he was a white supremacist, because he's like, he still seemed like a victim blamer. Like he wouldn't say that God is punishing you for your sins, but he would say, if you're not in the flow, you get sick, or, you invite things into your experience. And then my grandpa tried to make it a little more rational. He'd be like, well, you don't necessarily create the storm, but by being in the flow, you choose to not experience it. So the storm can happen, but you don't have to get all caught up in it. Or, but even like rape, my grandpa would be like, I think that my grandpa would say, yeah, a woman who's expressing dualistic software might get herself in situations that would get her raped more. And to me, it seems like victim blaming. But at the same time, my grandpa would say, like, even if she's raped, you are not your body. So a woman who's raped and she's like, oh, I was raped, and then she makes a big deal about it, and then she becomes a victim, my grandpa would say that's self-confirmatory, as opposed to, my grandpa said that he was a psychologist, and he would deal with women who were raped, and they didn't make such a big deal about it, and they could move on because they don't care. Because my grandpa would say they don't identify so much with the body, because my grandpa would say the body is an illusion. Everything is energy. Everything is one. So you don't identify so much with the body. You don't get so caught up in being a victim, because my grandpa would say being a victim is self-confirmatory. Like one example of that too would be like, I knew this Christian guy. He was a Messianic Jew. And he's a Jew who believes in Jesus, right? Or I guess, but he kind of bragged that he never had sex, and he was a really old guy. And my grandpa would say, well, even him bragging about that he's like, I'm a victim, I'm inferior. But by saying that, he's also trying to be superior by being like, yeah, I'm so poor, I'm so downtrodden, I'm such a low. But still, it's self-confirmatory. He still believes he's a separate self, and he's still trying to be superior by being inferior. But my grandpa's teachings are complex, right? So I like my grandpa's teachings, but at the same time, I thought that they were a little bit right wing and a little bit victim blaming and still white supremacist. Still seemed too spiritual to me. And like I said, I wanted all spirituality to end. I was a Marxist because I saw spirituality as white supremacists maintaining the white race. So, I saw spirituality as like, take responsibility, be against victim blaming, and take responsibility, and just accept, and everything is, it seemed to me like, I like Marx's idea. Like, Marx was against, you see, my grandpa still seemed a little bit too much like religious, because my grandpa would be like, well, you don't go to, I don't believe in a magical separate God who sends you to hell, but if you're not in the flow, then you still, if you still identify with the body and you still are in that delusion, then when you die, you have a more difficulty, leaving the body, your consciousness. And that's what people call hell. So it's like, it seems like it's less religious. It seems like it's less, but at the same time, I'm still like, dude, you're the same thing as the religious people, but you're just trying to sound a little bit more scientific. But, you know, you're still a victim blamer. And like, you know, Marx, he didn't want to believe in heaven and hell because he thought that kept people from revolting. And I was like, yeah, you know, I want revolution. I want the darker races to destroy the white races. I want the borders to be dissolved, you know, because I saw the white races as the biggest threat to the Jews. And, you know, I saw religion as maintaining status quo and keeping people in place like Marxism does. So I didn't want any belief in heaven and hell, you know. But my grandpa would, you know, there's complexities because my grandpa would be like, yeah, well, you don't want to, you know, if you're trying to go to heaven or hell, then, you know, you still believe you're the separate body. So that's like the rich young ruler who goes to Jesus. He's like, Jesus, how can I go to heaven? And Jesus says, let go of all your belongings. So my grandpa would say that this guy still believed he was a separate body. So Jesus recognized that and he said, okay, let go of all your possessions. But my grandpa would say, you know, again, it seemed right wing, but, you know, it doesn't mean really that everybody should let go of their possessions. But Jesus was always an inspiration. He can discern that that's what this guy needed because he still believed he was a separate body. He was still attached, but he wouldn't do it. And then Jesus said, it's hard for a rich man to go to heaven. But my grandpa's saying it doesn't mean that if you're rich, you can't go to heaven. My grandpa was saying that what it means is if you're attached to your riches or you're attached to the illusion that you're a separate body. But my grandpa would say, but there's also poor people who are attached. And there's also rich people who are not attached. So he's saying by rich, he's saying people who are attached to their riches. But anyways, I didn't want to see it that way. I wanted to be like, no, Jesus was a Marxist. He wanted everybody to get rid of their riches. Because I wanted to destroy the white race, and I saw the white race as more rich, and, you know, and I wanted them to give their riches to the darker races and for the white races to be annihilated, you know, so, because I saw myself as Jewish. So anyways, so I saw my grandpa still, you know, my grandpa being kind of anti-welfare, giving, I was a complete Marxist, but I had an agenda. So, just to kind of expand on that, yeah, so I'll just continue.